The flight deck had transformed as well, with aircraft being positioned for immediate launch capability and ordnance being loaded, with the kind of precision that suggested someone expected shooting to start soon. Ghost found herself wondering if Viper and Talon understood how their disappearance had triggered preparations that could reshape the strategic balance across the entire Pacific region. Lieutenant Commander Ace Jackson was waiting beside the EA-18G Growler, his flight suit bearing the patches of someone who'd earned respect through operational excellence rather than political connections. At 34, he carried himself with the confident efficiency of a pilot who'd successfully completed missions in multiple theaters, and Ghost recognized the look immediately. Someone who understood that flying in contested airspace required skills that couldn't be taught in simulators. Captain Kensington, Jackson extended his hand with professional courtesy that masked obvious curiosity. Heard you've got some interesting stories about the Strait of Hormuz. Among other places, Ghost replied, studying the Growler with appreciation. The EA-18G represented the cutting edge of electronic warfare capabilities, its systems designed to detect, analyze, and potentially jam enemy communications and radar systems. For a reconnaissance mission in hostile territory, it was perfectly suited to the task. Jackson noticed her assessment. She's loaded with the latest toys: AN/ALQ-218 tactical jamming system, advanced electronic surveillance measures, and communication intercept capabilities that can pick up encrypted transmissions from 100 miles out. If Viper and Talon are still transmitting, we'll hear them. Ghost nodded approvingly as they conducted pre-flight inspection. The Growler's external fuel tanks would extend their operational range significantly, and the electronic warfare pods mounted beneath the wings contained technology that most pilots never got to see, let alone operate with in combat conditions. Jackson, what's your assessment of the tactical situation? Ghost asked as they completed their walk-around inspection. Honestly, it's a clusterfuck waiting to happen, Jackson replied with the blunt honesty that characterized most naval aviators. We've got at least 3 different nations with military assets converging on the search area, everyone claiming territorial rights that don't exist, and 2 missing F-35s sitting somewhere with enough classified technology to start a war if they fall into the wrong hands. They climbed into the Growler's tandem cockpit, Jackson taking the front seat as pilot while Ghost settled into the rear position where the electronic warfare officer normally operated. The array of displays and controls surrounding her was more complex than anything she'd encountered, representing capabilities that extended far beyond traditional fighter operations. Ghost, I need you to understand something, Jackson said as they ran through pre-flight procedures. This mission is officially listed as routine training flight. If we encounter hostile aircraft, our rules of engagement are extremely limited. We observe, we record, we report. We do not engage unless directly fired upon. Ghost understood the implications. They were flying into a situation where American pilots were potentially being hunted by hostile forces, but they couldn't take aggressive action without triggering a larger conflict. It was the kind of operational constraint that made military aviation as much about judgment as technical skill. The launch sequence began with the controlled violence that characterized all carrier operations. Ghost felt the familiar sensation of catapult acceleration, the brief moment of weightlessness as they cleared the flight deck, then the steady climb toward operational altitude. Below them, the Reagan battle group spread across the ocean like a constellation of military power, each vessel positioned to support operations or respond to threats. The Boeing 777 cut through 38,000 feet of crystalline darkness, its passengers lost in the artificial twilight of red-eye tranquility. In Seat 14C, Captain Lyra Ghost Kensington had finally surrendered to sleep, her weathered flight jacket draped over shoulders that had carried more weight than anyone aboard could imagine. The faint outline of her Air Force wings caught the overhead light, a detail most passengers would dismiss as costume jewelry. She'd been flying for 14 hours straight before boarding this civilian transport. Her F-22 Raptor parked in a classified hangar somewhere over the Pacific. The mission briefings were still echoing in her mind. Reconnaissance over contested waters, radio silence protocols, the kind of work that never made headlines but kept nations from sliding into chaos. Ghost had earned her call sign not for stealth, but for her uncanny ability to appear where the enemy least expected and disappear before they could react. The gentle hum of commercial engines was almost alien after years of afterburner thunder. Her fingers unconsciously traced the small scar above her left eyebrow, a memento from her first ejection over the Strait of Hormuz. Most people saw a 32-year-old woman in civilian clothes catching a red-eye to Denver. They couldn't see the countless hours of combat flight time, the 3 confirmed kills, or the classified missions that had made her one of the Pentagon's most requested pilots. But they were about to. The aircraft shuddered, not turbulence, something else. Ghost's eyes snapped open with the predatory alertness of someone who'd learned to distinguish between normal and catastrophic in milliseconds. Around her, passengers stirred but didn't wake. The cabin lights remained dim, the flight attendants nowhere to be seen. But Ghost could feel it, that electric tension in the air when everything was about to change. From first class, a voice cut through the artificial calm with military precision. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rick Sledgehammer Morrison, United States Navy SEALs. We have a situation developing, and I need to know, are there any military pilots currently aboard this aircraft?" The question hung in the recycled air like a challenge. Ghost felt every passenger around her suddenly become very awake, very aware that their routine flight had just transformed into something else entirely. She could hear whispered conversations starting, phones quietly powering on despite regulations, the subtle shift in atmosphere that occurs when civilians realize they're no longer in civilian airspace. Morrison's voice came again, more urgent this time. "I repeat, any fighter pilots, helicopter pilots, or military aviators, please identify yourselves immediately. We have an emerging tactical situation and limited time to respond." Ghost remained motionless in 14C, calculating. Whatever was happening, it was serious enough for a SEAL captain to break operational security protocols on a commercial flight. Her training told her to stay hidden, maintain cover. But her instincts, honed by years of impossible situations, were screaming something different. The aircraft banked sharply left, and Ghost knew their destination had just changed. Through the small oval window, she caught a glimpse of lights that shouldn't exist, a geometric pattern of illumination cutting through the Pacific darkness like a luminous scar. Naval vessels, arranged in perfect formation. This wasn't a medical emergency or mechanical failure. This was military mobilization on a scale that made her pulse quicken with recognition and dread. A flight attendant appeared beside Morrison's seat, her professional smile strained at the edges. Ghost could read the micro-expressions from 3 rows back. Controlled panic, barely contained urgency, the kind of tension that comes when civilians suddenly find themselves inside a classified operation. The attendant whispered something that made Morrison's jaw tighten. "Folks, I'm going to be direct with you," Morrison announced, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made even seasoned officers straighten unconsciously. "We're currently being diverted to the USS Ronald Reagan. That's a Nimitz-class supercarrier for those keeping track. The situation developing below us requires immediate tactical assessment, and frankly, we need every qualified pilot we can get our hands on." Ghost watched the passenger manifest in her mind. She'd memorized the faces during boarding, a habit that had saved her life more than once. Business executives, tourists, a few military families on leave. Nobody else was stepping forward. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, then desperate. Morrison continued, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I know this isn't standard protocol. I know you're thinking about operational security, about maintaining cover. But whatever classification level you're operating under, I guarantee this situation supersedes it. A businessman in 8A half raised his hand, then thought better of it. I flew Cessnas in college, he offered weakly. Appreciate the honesty, sir, but we need combat-rated pilots. Multi-engine jet experience preferred. Morrison's eyes swept the cabin with predatory efficiency. Ghost recognized the look. It was the same expression she wore when hunting targets at 40,000 feet. The intercom crackled again, this time with the pilot's voice, strained and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent toward the USS Ronald Reagan. For those unfamiliar with carrier operations, this will be different than your typical airport landing. Please ensure your seatbelts are secure and prepare for approach procedures. Ghost felt the familiar sensation of controlled descent, but something was wrong with the angle. Too steep, too fast. Either their pilot was making the adjustment for carrier approach, or something more serious was forcing their hand. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, her decision crystallizing with the same clarity that had carried her through countless combat missions. Captain Morrison, her voice cut through the cabin chatter like a blade through silk. Captain Lyra Kensington, United States Air Force, call sign Ghost, F-22 Raptor pilot, active duty, current mission status classified. The entire cabin turned to look at the woman in 14C, the quiet passenger they dismissed, now revealed as something entirely different. Morrison's expression shifted from desperation to something approaching relief, tinged with professional skepticism. Ghost, I've heard that call sign before. His eyes narrowed with recognition. Strait of Hormuz incident 18 months ago, 3 confirmed kills against superior numbers. Ghost's expression remained neutral, but inside, she felt the familiar weight of reputation settling on her shoulders. Ghost's expression remained neutral, but inside, she felt the familiar weight of reputation settling on her shoulders. Among other things, yes, sir. Morrison was already moving toward her, the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to rapidly changing tactical situations. We need to talk. Now. He gestured toward the front of the aircraft, where the first-class cabin had been hastily converted into something resembling a mobile command center. Laptops, satellite communication equipment, and what appeared to be real-time tactical displays filled every available surface. As Ghost followed Morrison forward, she caught fragments of hushed conversations from other passengers. Did she say F-22? How old is she? Doesn't look like a fighter pilot. The familiar chorus of doubt that had followed her through most of her career. She'd learned to let it wash over her like background static, irrelevant to the mission at hand. The makeshift command center revealed the true scope of whatever was developing. 3 Navy officers she hadn't initially noticed were hunched over displays showing satellite imagery, ship positions, and what appeared to be flight patterns. Real-time tactical intelligence, the kind that usually required security clearances and need-to-know protocols. Gentlemen, meet Captain Kensington, Ghost. Morrison's introduction carried weight. Ghost, this is Lieutenant Commander Hayes, our intelligence officer, and Commanders Peterson and Vasquez, tactical operations. Hayes looked up from his screen, his expression mixing relief with barely concealed skepticism. Ma'am, with all due respect, we were expecting someone with more seniority. Ghost had heard variations of this question for most of her adult life. Too young, too small, too female. The list of reasons why she couldn't possibly be as capable as her record suggested. She'd stopped trying to prove herself years ago and started letting her performance do the talking. Commander Hayes, I've been flying combat missions since I was 23. Current flight hours exceed 3,000, with approximately 40% in contested airspace. I've successfully completed missions that officially never happened in places that officially don't exist. My age and appearance are tactical advantages in most situations. Morrison nodded approvingly. Ghost, here's the situation. 3 hours ago, we lost contact with a reconnaissance flight operating near disputed waters in the South China Sea. Two F-35s conducting routine surveillance, call signs Viper and Talon. Last known position puts them approximately 200 nautical miles from where we're heading. The tactical display shifted, showing their projected flight path toward the carrier group. Ghost studied the information with the same intensity she brought to pre-flight briefings, her mind already processing variables, calculating probabilities, identifying potential complications. "Search and rescue," she asked, though her instincts suggested something more complex. "That was the initial assumption," Vasquez replied, his fingers dancing across the keyboard to bring up additional data. "But 30 minutes ago, we started picking up intermittent emergency beacons. Not distress calls, tactical frequency transmissions. Short bursts, heavily encoded but definitely from military aircraft." Ghost felt her pulse quicken. Emergency beacons meant survivors, but tactical frequency transmissions meant something else entirely. Active operations, possibly ongoing engagement, definitely classified beyond what most people in this cabin should be hearing. "You're telling me they're not just down, they're operational." "That's our assessment," Morrison confirmed. "And here's where it gets complicated. The area where they went down is currently experiencing what diplomatic channels are calling heightened maritime tensions. Multiple nations have assets in the area, and everyone's claiming territorial waters.